Paul Rowe was out in the middle of the night listening to the frogs, looking for someone to help him identify which species it was. So thank you so much to those who are joining us and getting outside and sharing some bio with us. I want to remind you of two things. One, all of these events have Slido rooms. If you go to the speaker page on the website, every event has a Slido link where you can send in some questions for the speaker during our short little discussions at the end. We'd love to see some more of those coming in. And then, of course, we are doing this to raise some funds for some conservation groups that are hurting right now. So if you check the website, you can see how you can donate. There's a GoFundMe page. There's also a direct link to donate. So, you know, every little bit helps. $5 multiplied by, you know, all over the world can make a huge difference. All right, let us move along. I'm gonna let Wes back in here. Wes is gonna take over for a little. Wes Delavola. There he is. Hey, Wes.
Hey, everyone. How's it going?
Good. Good to see you. We just had a wild little back and forth. We started with the ocean with Ashlyn and Philippe Cousteau, and then we dove into the world of lichen. So we're covering all the bases today.
I mean, big, little, everything in between. And now we're going to talk about the slimy and endangered, I feel, is coming up next, right?
Yeah, but super cute if you talk to Jonathan. So he's waiting to come in. I'm going to let him in because you guys are in for a treat as you dive into the world of amphibians. So Jonathan's coming in. I'm going to say a quick hi, and then Wes, I'm going to leave you to it for a bit.
Yeah, I'm happy to be back in.
Yeah.
Hey, Jonathan, welcome back in.
Hello, how are you?
Doing good, doing good. Excited to hear about amphibians. Isn't that right, Joe?
Yes.
Oh, no question. Absolutely. There's no better person. I had just stayed in for a minute just to see your face, Jonathan. I wanted to say hi, and I can't wait to tune in live and get into some froggy, amphibian-y goodness.
Let's do it.
All right. I'm going to leave the two of you to it. We'll see you in a bit.
Okay.
Hey, Joe, make sure I'm the host, and then I'll be good to go and take charge, too. So, Jonathan, I'm excited to hear about the amphibians that you work with. I know that you were doing a lot with CITES, which is working to enforce wildlife trafficking laws and protection for animals. Mm-hmm. So from that, you've done work in Honduras. You're a National Geographic Explorer. So it's fair to say that you are an amphibian lover.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Well, I'm excited to hear more about that. And then once you're done, we'll jump back in. We'll maybe get some questions from people. So if you have any questions, please send them on over. So that way we can ask at the end of the talk. And we'll chat a little bit more about amphibians and everything in between once you're done. And I'll make sure that to get out of your way so you can share your screen and get started.
Okay. Let me share my screen.
Perfect.
Okay. Do you see that?
Oh, I see it. Look at that cute frog.
All right. Great. Well, thank you, everyone, for coming today. As you heard, my name is Jonathan Kolby, and I'm going to give you a presentation called Hope in the Midst of the Amphibian Extinction Crisis. First, I'll just mention a lot of you watching may know me from different areas of work that I do. I do wear a lot of different hats. Some of you may know me from my previous work with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service when I was helping with CITES policy, or as a wildlife inspector regulating the wildlife trade. But over the past decade, I've also been working in the field directly with amphibian conservation. And that's what I'm going to be talking to you about today. So in the world, there's roughly 8,000 described species of amphibians. And that ranges from frogs and toads, salamanders, and caecilians. Their diversity is incredible, as well as where they live. A lot of people think of amphibians mostly as creatures that live in the rainforest, but actually you can find them everywhere from, the edge of the tropical Caribbean beach where the trees start all the way up to, 15,000 feet in the mountains where the snow is melting. And because of that, that expansive habitat that they live in, they're also really good indicators of a variety of environmental health factors. So over the past several decades, it's well known that there's increasing threats to global amphibian biodiversity. Many obvious reasons, ranging from habitat destruction, pollution, climate change, harvesting for the food trade, pet trade. But what I specifically focus on is disease and how diseases are impacting amphibians. To me, diseases are a fascinating, overwhelmingly scary conservation issue compared to these others because they don't know boundaries like we do when we protect a forest. And it really challenges the conventional thought of how do we protect a species if protecting habitat isn't enough. And specifically, the disease that I primarily have been studying for the past 10 years is called amphibian chytrid fungus. Specifically, the scientific name is Batrachochytrium dendrobatidis, which is a bit of a mouthful. There is a second pathogenic species that I'll mention later on. I will be saying chytrid. Technically, there are hundreds of species of chytrid fungus in the environment, and most of them are actually really good and really important at breaking down things in the environment. Unfortunately, amphibian chytrid fungus breaks down animals that are alive, specifically amphibians. It's an aquatic fungal pathogen. It has spores that have a little flagellum tail that allow it to swim in the water like an animal. And because of that, it's able to gravitate towards the amphibians where it latches onto them, burrows down into their skin to the area that produces keratin, and that's where it grows and reproduces. And because for amphibians, their skin is so incredibly important for respiration and osmosis and electrolyte balance, it eventually causes tiny frog heart attacks, basically. The thing that I find so interesting and scary about chytrid fungus is that, the spread of wildlife diseases is nothing new, but we've never had a disease ever in recorded history that has been able to affect an entire class of organisms. So of the 8,000 species of amphibians, many of them can become infected with this one disease. And it is also causing extinction in multiple continents at the same time. And we've never seen that before. So where is frog chytrid fungus? During my PhD work, I mapped all the publications. This is a bit of an overrepresentation, just showing at the country level has it been detected. Basically, the point here is it is global. It is a pandemic. It was described in 1999. Hold on, there's a comment. Wait, hold on one second. And it is in at least 60 or 70 countries, probably more at this point, and it's still spreading. Oh wait, hold on, my PowerPoint isn't playing, someone just said. Am I having technical difficulties, Wesley?
Yeah, it looks like we're not advancing, but I mean, it's really great. We're hearing all this great, great information, but we can't see the slides as you advance. So just wanted to make sure that everyone gets to see all these great images that you've got that help tell the story.
On my screen, it is. What could be wrong?
It may be that it's recognizing this as a as your preview screen and your camera or your monitor as the play one. So that could potentially be it. So your sound good, look good. We're hearing all the great things. We just can't see the images. So maybe if you just open it up, go off play and full screen and kind of advance that way, we can at least see them as you move through with us.
Okay, let me try that.
The joys of live festival experiences.
Okay, I'm gonna stop the share and then go back to share.
All right, let's give it a try. I'm here for.
Bear with me, everyone. Okay, can you see this?
Still see the first slide, which is a great frog shot, but I see your mouse moving over the next slide right now.
Okay, do you see the second slide now?
Yes, I sure do.
Do you see the third one?
I do. Oh, great.
Okay.
This is all the things you were talking about, the threats to amphibian biodiversity. Now I get it. All right.
Okay.
Let's get back to it.
We'll get back to it. Okay, so this is working now, correct?
Looks like it sure is.
Okay, sorry everyone. Okay, so again, here's Chytrid being global in distribution, now that you can see it. And it's still spreading, and that's why it's so scary. It is still spreading after 20 years of recognition that this is a problem. So in a nutshell, this is what I looked at during my PhD thesis at James Cook University in Australia. I wanted to know from a big picture view, how is this even happening, and how is it still happening? How is it still moving so efficiently all around the world, and causing animals to decline and become extinct? So I looked at things from direct animal to animal contact, how it moves through weather systems like hurricanes, through our own movements, and through the wildlife trade. But today, what I'm going to talk to you about is specifically looking at it on a small scale. So that was looking at global issues of chytrid fungus and disease. But at the same time, I've been looking at how is it affecting frogs in one specific location in a place called Cusuco National Park in Honduras, which is an incredible montane cloud forest. Normally, you think of rainforest, you think hot, warm, tropical. Cusuco is really special in that it's at 5,000 feet elevation in the mountains, in the clouds, where it's cool and damp and has these oceans of clouds that just kind of move through. So I started working there in 2006 with a British organization called Operation Wallacea to help out with some of their biodiversity surveys to help protect this imperiled rainforest. So this became my office. This was my bedroom. This is my shower. Mind you, I was living here for about 2 months at a time. Some of my neighbors were frogs that I became very good friends with. We also had incredible insects that looked like dead leaves, insects with armor, snakes that chuckled, caterpillars that looked like dragons, butterflies with racing stripes, lizards with mohawks, and spiders that would throw their webs at insects. But as you probably guessed, I'm here because of the frogs. And I started searching for chytrid fungus in this cloud forest in 2007, which is when I was awarded a Young Explorers grant from National Geographic. I was reading IUCN Red List assessments about some of these frogs that we were identifying, and I was alarmed to read that a lot of them were already listed as critically endangered and were said to be declining for unknown reasons. And that was around the same time that I learned that chytrid fungus was a thing, and that a smoking gun that chytrid fungus might be impacting species is when you have a really pristine, beautiful habitat, no collection for the pet trade, no obvious, reason these animals would be disappearing, and yet they're still disappearing. So I started doing surveillance for disease in 2007, and basically am continuing it today. So I'm going to talk about some of those results. But at the same time, over the past 10 years, while trying to understand what is the disease doing to these frogs and might we need to intervene and rescue them, we also wanted to understand as much as we could about these animals, because there's often a perception that, we can just go into a rainforest, rescue these animals, take them out, put them in a zoo, put them in a facility, and just breed them. And it's actually often a lot more complicated than that. You really have to know a lot about these animals, and you have to understand what do they like, what do they need, what do they want. And sometimes we don't have that luxury of time, but sometimes we do. And if we can, we want to study more of that. So myself and my colleagues did some radio tracking with these little waist belts or backpacks, where every 12 hours for several weeks, we would relocate a dozen frogs to see where were they sitting, how far away from water were they, how high off the ground were they, and that was enlightening. We also did some market capture studies using different ways of trying to identify individual frogs, because another major question is, to really understand what's happening to these populations, you have to understand what the population size even is. And that's really challenging, because for a lot of endangered species that we work with in this rainforest, they're already really hard to find. So you have to be able to recapture a lot of the same animals to do the mathematical equations to really understand trends over time. So this was just a neat experiment we were doing with something called alphanumeric visual implant elastomers that were almost like these little injectable tattoos of a code, which became a fingerprint of sorts. Another research aspect that I was interested in was, what about the frogs that live above us, that never come to the ground or never have to come to the ground? You know, we conventionally think of Chytrid fungus as an aquatic pathogen because it will die if it dries out completely. So we think of rivers, we think of lakes and things like that. We don't always think about the water that's in the trees above our heads. And in the rainforest, there are these plants called bromeliads that look like the top of your pineapple, and they collect rainwater and leaf debris and insects in the center of those tanks. And there's a couple types of frogs called bromeliad frogs that actually live their entire life cycles inside these plants, you know, 10, 20, 30 meters up in the tree. So how are they being impacted by disease, or are they? So we started climbing the trees to look for the frogs. Of course, at first we weren't very good at doing this. So we went to tree climbing school and became certified in canopy access rope techniques so we could do this much more efficiently and safely. And by the way, to everyone that thinks science is boring and not sporty, it can certainly be sporty and adventurous. Just saying. So in a nutshell, what have I seen in the past 10 years? Well, as any other story, there's good news and there's bad news. So the good news is that, you know, by luck, as it happens, one of the 2 species of frogs in Honduras that have been declared extinct, presumably because of Chytrid fungus, I rediscovered in the process of this work. We've only found a couple animals since in the past 10 years. So, you know, it's not a super happy ending because we still don't know, are these species, is the species on the brink of extinction and just still on that precipice? Or might it be developing resistance to Chytrid fungus and on the rebound? So nonetheless, incredibly exciting to rediscover an extinct species when you study animals becoming extinct. But the bad news is that essentially everywhere I looked for Chytrid, if I looked hard enough, I found it. And that included in all the rivers I looked, up in the bromeliads, with the tree frogs, and even in a couple weather events, I found Chytrid in the rain. So that brings us to what I consider the global conservation challenge when it comes to Chytrid fungus and disease. And that is that essentially Chytrid is still spreading for reasons I'll mention later, but we're running out of amphibian habitats that have not been exposed. And once Chytrid invades a new habitat, we cannot safely, at the present time, get rid of it. We can't kill it without killing lots of really good things in the environment at the same time. And that puts us in a really precarious situation because more and more amphibians are declining as a result. And around the world, zoos are doing the best that they can. But by and large, we're running out of space, time, and money to take more and more and more species into captivity, also without a really clear solution. There's no silver bullet cure right now. So that's why myself and my colleagues established what is called the Honduras Amphibian Rescue and Conservation Center in a town called Tela, Honduras, located a couple hours away from the rainforest that I've been talking about. And essentially, you know, the easiest way to explain what this is and how to talk about it is it's basically a frog hospital that we have built inside 2 ocean shipping containers. And they are set up to be climate controlled, light controlled, basically with the ability to replicate the climatic environment in this rainforest with life support systems for these frogs. And there's 3 species that we're focusing on right now for the initial rescue efforts because they are the most endangered or the most affected by Chytrid fungus. And that's the exquisite spike thumb frog, which is our biggest frog, tree frog in the park. It's almost the size of your fist. It's an extraordinary species. It's very reminiscent of an Australian frog popular in the pet trade called the dumpy tree frog or the White's tree frog, except this one has what almost looks like a second thumb, which is a bone dagger that the males may use to fight for territory. We have its smaller cousin, another spike thumb frog called the Cusuco spike thumb frog. And this one and the previous one, when I mentioned that they're endangered and imperiled, it's because they're also endemic to Cusuco National Park. So they're only found in a few rivers at the top of this mountain and nowhere else in the world. So they're extremely in a precarious situation when a disease event hits. And the third species is, you know, our rendition of the red-eyed tree frog called the mossy red-eyed frog, which also lives outside the park in a couple other fragmented populations, but is also highly infected with this pathogen. So right now, I'm just going to show you a quick video, if this works, published by National Geographic and produced by Katie Garrett, that just gives a quick few-minute summary of what our rescue project does.
I think it's unfortunate that the first major wildlife disease outbreak on the world is affecting frogs, because a lot of people don't perceive frogs as charismatic and cute and important. But frogs have amazing personalities themselves. They are just as important in the environment as these large animals as well. And they're beautiful. Cusuco National Park is a montane cloud forest in northwestern Honduras. There is an amazing wealth of biodiversity, and especially for the reptiles and amphibians. It was recently assessed as in the top 25 sites in the world for its unique and imperiled amphibian diversity.
Martín Ramírez es el nombre. Yo tengo 82 años. Yo vivo aquí en el parque. Han terminado muchas razas de ramas. Pues más poco, menos cantan, ya no se oyen cantar mucho. Las crías de ranas ya no son las mismas. Y se necesita salvarlas, porque de repente se terminan.
So amphibian chytrid fungus is an aquatic fungal pathogen. It's one of the first wildlife diseases that has truly gone global by the time we knew it existed. It's leading to one of the largest mass extinctions that we have ever documented.
I've been working alongside Jonathan Kolby since 2010 here at Cusuco National Park. Through the research that we've been doing, we came to understand that chytrid was greatly affecting a lot of the populations of frogs here, and specifically some of the endemic species.
Frogs play a really important role in the food chain, so they support many organisms. Particularly, there's one snake species here that's an amphibian specialist, so it preys almost exclusively on amphibians, and it supports our population declines itself, which is almost as a direct result of amphibian populations crashing.
As the tadpole metamorphoses into a frog, its immune system suppresses because the tadpole begins to develop totally new organ systems that of an adult animal. The stage of metamorphosis is most often when they succumb to disease from chytrid. We have now established the Honduras Amphibian Rescue and Conservation Center, which means removing the younger, weaker animals before they die from chytrid, curing them, raising them to their stronger, healthy adults, and then reintroducing them.
What happens with a lot of rescue efforts is you take populations from the wild, you get them in captivity, and then reintroduction doesn't always happen. So the plan for HARC, I think, is unique.
I think HARC is a fantastic initiative, especially for the conservation of these really special species in the park. They're a pleasure to see in their natural environment, and I would love it if in future years I can see their populations increase as a direct result of it.
Okay. And I will mention, just to supersede any questions you guys might have, it may not have been explained in much detail, but the reason why head starting, which is what HARC is going to be trying to doing, is collecting weaker young animals, bring them to a facility where the disease can be managed, and then reintroduce stronger older adults. The reason we believe that will be effective, at least for the species that we're working with, is because over 10 years of surveillance, we've noticed trends in the infection and the way that the disease affects these frogs, that although the young ones are highly negatively impacted, that the ones that are lucky enough to become adults, although we don't know why those are the lucky ones, they are able to coexist with chytrid. They are curing themselves, they are persisting. And that is the reason why we believe this is basically our best effort of assisted natural selection and evolution. If we can at least pump more frogs back into the rainforest where they belong, while natural selection tries to make them stronger. So as we've also heard today, none of these threats act in a vacuum. And, meanwhile, I've just been talking about disease. You turn around now and a lot of this rainforest is being illegally destroyed by people that are coming in for cattle or coffee or cardamom or you name it. So yeah, not to make it seem like we act in a vacuum, but there's a lot of threats in addition to climate change. This is a cloud forest. The clouds are disappearing. and that also impacts these animals. You might also be thinking, okay, well, he's talking mostly about frogs. What about salamanders? So for the longest time, we thought frog chytrid fungus, was mostly affecting frogs. And salamanders could be infected, but it didn't seem like they were declining the way that frogs were. But then unfortunately, a handful of years ago, salamanders started disappearing in Europe, specifically fire salamanders. And long story short, it was found that there is a second species of pathogenic chytrid fungus, now called salamander chytrid fungus, which is starting all over again to do the same thing to salamanders. Fortunately, we don't believe that it has yet reached the United States, which is a bit of a special circumstance. As a result of that, the US Fish and Wildlife Service did recently ban the importation of 201 species of salamanders out of the 600 plus species of known salamanders for commercial importation, hoping that that would basically buy us time and prevent the spread of that disease. But if people ask me, like, how do I feel about that? I'm still very concerned because we also have evidence now that frogs can carry salamander chytrid fungus. And we import millions of frogs into the United States every year, which are loaded with chytrid and rhinovirus and other diseases. So it's very possible that we are actively importing salamander chytrid fungus in frogs right now. That's also, I'll just mention really quick, we've talked a little bit today about citizen science and iNaturalist. So I'm also doing my own citizen science project I started several years ago. If anyone sees a dead salamander or a mortality event anywhere in the world, but especially in the United States, please look up this project and upload photographs and information about where and when you saw that. And I'm moderating these records. And if it's something of note, that information gets forwarded to the local state wildlife authorities, and they can choose whether they want to respond to that event to see if it's chytrid fungus. So some of you might be thinking, okay, by now, he's been rambling on and on about frogs. Why should I care? There's lots of reasons. There's lots of reasons why the health of wildlife affects your health. Frogs eat just millions and millions of insects. We all know some of those insects, like mosquitoes, can spread diseases to humans like malaria and Zika and dengue. Frogs themselves, they eat lots of insects, but lots of other animals eat frogs. As was mentioned in the video, some snakes only eat frogs. A lot of birds and mammals rely on frogs for food. The tadpoles of some frogs eat a lot of vegetation in the water, which actually helps the water not foul and maintains water quality, which also affects the other aquatic biodiversity. But, in the big picture, I don't really like saying those things because for me, those are false justifications for protecting biodiversity. I truly believe that, we shouldn't look at animals as justify why they deserve to be saved. Because what about the animals that we just don't know much about? That, does that mean that they don't deserve to be saved just because we haven't studied them? No. So, there's lots of people out there that need it to be justified in the ways that I just explained. But personally, just their mere existence and understanding that they're part of the greater ecosystem deserves to be respected. And that brings me in closing to something called One Health. And this increasing recognition that the health of animals, the health of humans, and the health of the environment is so tightly interconnected that knocking off and neglecting any one of those will come full circle sooner or later. And we're all experiencing that right now, with COVID-19 and, how that originally had some relationship with animals. And because of humans' relationship with those animals, we have spillover events. If you're interested to know more about that, a couple of weeks ago, I published a story with National Geographic about how incredibly ginormous the legal wildlife trade is, particularly in the United States, but globally, and how we don't often think about how little people are actually looking for diseases in the animals that we knowingly trade. They normally think, a lot of people think that diseases spread in illegal trade, which is true, but there's very little control over legal trade and disease. So in closing, I will end this with a quote from Kermit the Frog, which seems quite appropriate, which said, "It seems to me that if you wait until the frogs and toads have croaked their last to take some action, you've missed the point." And I know I breezed through a lot of that. A lot of that was more complex. So please, even if you can't ask questions right now, do feel free to always reach out to me any way that you like. whether by email or social media, myfrogcroaked, or our website at frogrescue.com. I would love to talk more with you. So thank you.
Well, that was a great run through why frogs are so important. And, you know, definitely kind of won me over yet again with your love enthusiasm for frogs. And I definitely have to say they are adorable, which is not a precursor to, you know, protecting. I'm going to say that right out front, but definitely great little guys to be supporting. And we've got about a minute till we're done with this segment, but I do have a question. So you mentioned that this can spread to salamanders, and, you know, from frogs to salamanders. What is one thing that we can do, everyone here that's watching, that, you know, can do to help stave, you know, the spread, do anything we can to protect frogs and salamanders and other amphibians from Chytrid?
I'd say that there's two quick, easy things. One, if you're a pet owner, and one, just if you're, you know, the average person going outside. You know, if you're a pet owner, just be very cognizant that the way even captive bred animals, a lot of pet owners feel that even if they're buying captive bred, it's always important to ask questions at the store, like where's it coming from, where, you know, stuff like that. But do keep in mind that even captive bred animals often have these pathogens because they're bred in high quantities. And when you have lots of animals squished together, that's rife for spreading disease. So it is very good that you know, buy captive bred and sustainable and legal, but also still be careful and cognizant. And for like the average person, and especially scientists, when you're going to wetlands, no matter what kind of scientist you are, we should all be careful about hygiene practices and cleaning our boots and our equipment. You know, frog people talk about it all the time, about, like, you know, bleaching your boots and your nets. But what I can't help but think about is how many other kinds of scientists are in the same habitats, but we don't have a lot of outreach with each other. That, you know, maybe the plant people or the bird people or, you know, the fish people, we all need to talk more about these things that affect each other.
So, like everything, we're all in this together and need to collaborate and communicate. And so now we've got someone new we're going to keep collaborating with and communicating with, and Joe's back in. So a big thank you to Jonathan Kolby for taking us on an adventure with amphibians and getting us to better understand how we can help them. And I'm going to hand off to Joe and say goodbye to Jonathan. Because we've got our next presenter getting ready to come in and get started. So I will let everyone transition on to that.
All right.
And
bye, everyone.
We'll see you later, Jonathan.
Okay.
Thanks, Jonathan. And Wes, thank you so much. We'll see you in about an hour and a half for a little more.
Exactly. Well, and thank you again for letting me be part of this. I'm excited to see how the rest of the next hour and a half goes. And until then, I will be watching from home and maybe venture outside to my backyard and share that with everyone too.
Well, Wes, how can we not have you join in? There's more biodiversity behind you than in a lot of people's backyards.
Well, that might be what you're going to see, because this is pretty much my backyard in apartment living. There's not really much of a backyard here. So I brought it inside.
All right. Amazing. Well, again, thanks so much, Wes. We'll let you split for a bit, and I'm going to let Emma come in and join us.
Sounds great.
All right. So good to see everybody joining us here again. I'm going to give a second for Emma to load in and join us. Hi, Emma. How are you?
Hi, good. How are you doing?
Good, good. Great to see you joining us from Australia. That's pretty darn awesome.
Yeah.
So I thought before we got started, Emma, I just wanted to give a little shout out to, because we've been watching the analytics all day. We've been going since first thing this morning. We've got groups tuning in right now from the US, from Canada, the United Kingdom, France, Mexico, to name a few countries. So it's great to be giving shout outs to these groups, and even better that they're hanging around for all of these amazing events during the Global Biodiversity Festival.
Yeah, it's amazing. Hi, everyone.
All right. Well, we have Emma Camp joining us. She researches and advocates for the world's marine life under threat from changes in the environment, changes in our climate. As an ocean explorer, she's discovered natural populations